Okay, guys, we are about to tackle. All right, let's just set that there because those aren't working. We're about to tackle our second section of the Canterbury Tales prologue. We're going to get 5 characters today, so it's a little bit of a ride today, but we're going to be fine. So we're going to start with a section that's the religious section. Now, there are more that will show up. We have 3 people here, all of them. They increasingly are worse. Okay, so our first 2, the prioress and the monk, are both flawed characters. They definitely have some issues, but they're not nearly in the category that the friar is. The friar is terrible. Then we're going to see our first third estate characters. Now, there's another religious character that comes up later called the parson, who's our ideal character, and then we end on the 2 absolute worst religious figures. So yes, it feels like Chaucer does have a little bit of a interest in attacking the church, but I want you to understand he's not attacking the entire church. He's attacking the hypocrisy he sees, which is a fair attack, to be honest. All right, so let's start with the nun. We're going to pick up on page 100, right there around line 120, a little bit after, okay? So, again, she is not a terrible person. She has the same issues the monk does, okay? They're just for different reasons. Chaucer does this. He kind of will clump characters together that may have similar issues, and they just kind of, he did this with, who am I trying to think of? Not yet. We haven't seen it yet. See, let's start here, okay, before I get ahead of myself. So let's look at the nun. So there also was a nun, a prioress, and by the way, you will see those interchangeably, the nun and the prioress. Her way of smiling very simple and coy. Her greatest oath was only by St. Loy, and she was known as Madame Eglantine. Now, right away, a couple things. The names, I'll be honest with you, the names that Chaucer gives are not really all that important to me. I imagine that they're just to keep the couplets the way he needs them to be. So St. Loy is if you look in your book down there at the bottom, it's the patron saint of goldsmiths and courtiers. So courtiers here meaning, more than likely, people in the fancy court. All right, not courtier has another term. I don't think that's the reference here. We also have goldsmiths, which would be people who make jewelry. Now, she's a nun. A nun is a poorer position in the church for females, and the fact that she's swearing, first of all, is not a good thing. But second of all, by this person, which has things to do with nothing that has to do with her, gives you kind of a hint of what's wrong with the nun, okay? The nun is a person who doesn't really want to be in the church. She is in the church because she doesn't really know what else to do with herself. And this was a valid way of employing yourself for a lot of people. It was, let's get involved in the church, and we will make an easy living and not really be serious about the work. And she's one of those people, sadly. So she wants to be a first estater. She really is. We're going to find out later, or at least it's going to hint, Chaucer's going to hint, but maybe she's not quite got what it takes to be a noble. Maybe not just because of birth, but also because of her appearance. So she doesn't want to work, so she has the church to lean on. But she's never really thrown herself into the church, and that's kind of her issue. All right, let's keep going. She was known as Madame Eglantine, and well she sang a service with a fine intoning through her nose, as was most seemly, and she spoke daintily in French, extremely. After the school of Stratford at Bow, French in the Paris style she did not know. Now, a couple of things about her right now. She is a somewhat humorous figure, in my opinion, okay? She speaks French, but Stratford at Bow, or Bow, I don't know how you'd say it, is a British place. She speaks it the same way most of you speak Spanish, okay? With terrible accent and butchering every word. So he's kind of mocking her for it. By the way, what language would a person who's employed and working for the church need to know? Not French. Probably Latin would have been the language she should have been learning. The fact that she's learning French indicates that she's more in tune with the the second estate, the courtliness, because French is what they would speak at court with the king and the queen and all of that. So she wants to be part of that world, not part of the religious world, okay? It says, no morsel from her lips did she let fall, nor dipped her fingers in the sauce too deep, but she could carry a morsel up and keep the smallest drop from falling on her breast. For courtliness she had a special zest, and she would wipe her upper lip so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen upon the cup which she had drunk. To eat, she reached a hand very sedately for the meat. She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways of grace, and straining to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing befitting to her place. Now, so here's a couple of important things about her. The nun is a very fleshed out character, okay? There's a lot about her. She's very big on having proper manners, which again would show more of a concern about courtly behavior than religious and behavior that would intone herself to being a nun. She's still worried about coming off as if she's a fancy person. Okay, the way she speaks, the way she eats. It talks about how listen to the wording he uses here, to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace. Which here's the part that makes it humorous. She's not pulling this off. She's trying to look fancy. She's trying to have all these manners, but it's obvious what she's doing, and everyone knows she's not pulling it off. All right. And to seem dignified in all her dealings. As for her sympathies and tender feelings, she was all tender feelings, She was so charitably solicitous, she used to weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, if it were dead or bleeding. And she had little dogs she would be feeding with roasted flesh or milk or fine white bread. And bitterly she would weep if one were dead, or somebody took a stick and made it smart. She was all sentiment and tender heart. Okay, a couple things that, she's an animal lover. Yeah, a couple things about that. She cares a lot more about animals than she does what she's supposed to be doing, which is caring about God and the poor people in her parish. She's much more concerned about, feeding the animals food that she shouldn't have access to. Nuns wouldn't eat fancy stuff. None of these, low-level religious people would have access to it. So we wonder where she's getting the money for this stuff to feed them. The monk, it's obvious he's stealing, in my opinion. The nun, it's not as obvious, but there's definitely the suggestion. So again, she's also this person who's like, oh no, this poor mouse that's dead. She's obviously, we see this today with people who are a little bit overly sensitive about, oh no, please don't step on that cockroach. He's so cute. That kind of nonsense. Okay. So she's a humorous figure, comical. She's flawed. She's not bad, though, okay? Poor girl just is in the wrong business, to be honest with you. Her veil was gathered in a seemly way. Her nose was elegant, her eyes glass gray. Her mouth was very small, but soft and red. Her forehead certainly was fair of spread, almost a span across the brows, I own. She was indeed by no means undergrown. So Chaucer there, fat shaming this poor girl. But he says she's got a big forehead and she's by no means undergrown. Some of that Chaucer wit that we see. She's, again, something that wouldn't happen with nuns. Nuns wouldn't be big because they ate very little and were much more concerned about prayer and service, not this. So she is not fitting the bill with what her job should be. All right? Her cloak, I noticed, had a graceful charm. She wore a coral trinket on her arm, a set of beads, the gaudies tricked in green, whence hung a golden brooch of brightest sheen, on which there first was graven a crowned A, and lower, Amor Vincit Omniae. Now, benefit of having Mr. Morse with you. Amor Vincit Omniae would be love conquers all. All right, I think that's the phrase. Love conquers all. It's down there at the bottom. That's not the part you need me for. Most of you probably wouldn't have triggered on that and been like, wait, she shouldn't have had that. She's not supposed to be focusing on the concept of love. This is more that courtly love business we talked about with the squire. She's part of that belief too. Actually, she shouldn't have jewelry at all. So this coral trinket, the beads, all of the different things she's wearing indicates things that a nun wouldn't have. But that brooch is particularly problematic. It should say Amor Dei, or, love God is what it should say, because nuns are the bride of Christ. Or the church is the bride of Christ. The nuns serve the church that way. They're supposed to love him, not be involved with all the romantic notions of courtly love. So the poor girl just doesn't fit. Everything about her that she wants to be, she's not. And so she's now found herself in a situation where she's being asked to be something she just is not cut out for. So what sin of the 7 deadly would be attached to her? Well, guys, I'm not really sure which is the best to hook to her, all right? There's a lot of little elements, okay? Of course, we have the same problem we saw with the yeoman, and that she's, she's trying to be something she's not. The yeoman was trying to be this forester when, whether he actually pulled that off or not, I don't know. Chaucer seems to cast doubt on it. The nun is trying to look like a nun, she's trying to look like a courtier, but she's really not. You could maybe attach gluttony to her because of the overeating. You could maybe attach lustfulness because when it talks about her veil being gathered in a seemly way, it seems like maybe she's trying to attract attention because, of course, she is interested in love. To be honest with you, I wouldn't attach one directly to her. She definitely is not a good character, but she's definitely far, far from a bad one. Now, here's one of Chaucer's tricks. He says another nun was the chaplain at her cell was riding with her, and 3 priests as well. Well, there's 4 people right there we don't detail. So we're actually up to that to be 3, 4, 8 people now, but we don't have any details on these characters, so I'm not going to ask you about them. Let's get to the monk. The monk and the nun or the priors, whichever one you go with, are very similar characters. They have a lot in common. The monk, though, there's a little bit more sinister bent to him, okay? It says, a monk there was, one of the finest sort, who rode the country. Hunting was his sport. A manly man to be an abbot able. Many a dainty horse he had at stable. Wait, why does he have horses? Monks are like nuns. They shouldn't have things. So, red flag, okay? His bridle when he rode, a man might hear jingling in a whistling wind, as clear aye and as loud as does the chapel bell where my lord monk was prior of the cell. They're saying when he's out, this is ironic, when he's out traveling and doing his hunting, they said his bells on his horse jingle as loud as the church bell where he's supposed to be. Okay, so he's not there. He's hunting, also not a monkly activity, to be honest with you. Monks would have probably, their food would have been vegetable based, so they would have grown it. It wouldn't have been through hunting. Says the rule of good St. Bennet or St. Maur, as old and strict, he tended to ignore. He let go by the things of yesterday and took the world's more spacious way. If you look at the bottom, you've got notes on St. Bennet or St. Maur. It's a St. Benedict, author of monastic rules, and St. Maurice, one of his followers. Bennet and Maur are French versions of Benedict and Maurice. So they would have been the ones who established the way monks should behave, which is prayer, work, spending a lot of time studying. It wouldn't be out hunting and enjoying, money that you should not possess. Since he did not rate that text at a plucked hen, which says that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk uncloistered is a mere fish out of water, flapping on the pier. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister. That was a text he held not worth an oyster. And I agreed and said his worldviews were sound. Was he to study till his head went round, poring over books in cloisters? Must he toil as Austin bade and till the very soil? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf? Let Austin have his labor to himself. Now, here's a big problem with him. He's like, what am I supposed to do? Sit around and study all day and till the ground and ignore all the great things of the world? And honestly, guys, the answer to that is yes. That's exactly what he's supposed to be doing. He's not supposed to be participating in that behavior. If he wanted to participate in that behavior, he shouldn't be he shouldn't be a clergyman. He shouldn't be in the first estate. He should be in the third. So he doesn't belong here. So why is he here? Well, my question is, how's he affording all this nice stuff? So he says, this monk was therefore a good man to horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun. He spared for no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine gray fur, the finest in the land. And on his hood, to fasten it at his chin, he had a wrought gold, cunningly fashioned pin. Into a lover's knot it seemed to pass. His head was bald and shone like a looking-glass. So did his face, as it had been greased. So he was a fat and personable priest. So we're getting a lot of these same indicators we got with the nun. He's got a lot of animals and stuff he shouldn't have. He's fat, meaning, again, he's eating well, which, again, that shouldn't be the case. He's got fancy clothes, which shouldn't be the case. So again, we get this slight image that these guys must be somehow stealing from the church to be able to afford all of this, which would have been a really common thing at that time period, okay? All right. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. They glittered like the flames beneath the kettle. Supple his boots, his horse in fine condition. He was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was not pale like a tormented soul. He liked the fat swan best and roasted whole. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry. So, the monk's a little more sinister in my opinion because he is so anti what he's supposed to do. He's like, I'm not going to follow those rules. Those are stupid. Those aren't for me. I'm a worldly person, not part of this, religious tradition that I don't agree with. And therefore he should have never become a monk, to be honest with you. So again, we get the hypocrisy of this guy. Like the nun, I don't know exactly what you want to attach to him. I said we were going to attach a 7 deadly to each of them. That was a great idea, but there's some problems there, obviously. So he's got a lot of minor flaws, but you want a guy who's our first evil character, who's got no question about what's wrong with him. Let's look at the friar, because if you were to list your top 5 bad characters, I would probably have a mixture of the pardoner, the summoner, and the skipper right there, but the friar probably is a solid 4. You could probably argue to put him in the 3rd position. Excuse me. It says, there was a friar, a wanton one and merry, a limiter, a very festive fellow. So if you look at the bottom, a limiter is one who's given begging rights for a certain limited area. Basically, he has begging territory. And like, if you're like drug territory, it would be like, the areas that you would be able to sell the most drugs in would be the most sought after territory. Well, for these guys, the areas where you can get the most money from begging would be the key territories. All right. In all four orders there was none so mellow, so glib with gallant phrase and well-turned speech. He'd fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. He was a noble pillar to his order. Now remember, I told you have to be careful with Chaucer. When he says nice things, often they're not meant to be serious, and this is one of those instances. Okay, he'd fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. Now, I haven't seen anybody that backs this theory of mine. But I'm going to stick with it because I've taught this for years and I've really studied this. And so, but could I be wrong on this? Maybe. This, to me, the wording, though, is problematic. So he's fixing up marriages, which isn't his job, first of all. So he's basically setting people up, like, But look at the wording here. He fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. Why is he calling them his young women, and why is it what he could afford her? All right. It feels to me, based on what I know about this guy and some of the wording we get about him, that these are maybe girls that, and I apologize for the somewhat vulgar nature of this, but it feels like almost girls that maybe he's impregnated and that he's marrying them off real quick to save them and himself. Okay. Is that what happens? Maybe not, but the wording there definitely gives me cause to worry. Plus, this guy is a terrible human being. It fits with his character. All right. It says, highly beloved and intimate was he with country folk within his boundary. Notice the word intimate there. That's not accidental. Okay. Intimate could mean you're close to them, but it also could, again, have a sexual connotation. It says, in city dames of honor and possessions. Okay, so he's well known with the country folk and the city dames, so women in the city. All right. Or so for he was qualified to hear confessions, or so he said, with more than a priestly scope. He had a special license from the Pope. So here we go. He's lying and telling people he has the right to hear confession. And we're going to find out in a minute. He has a gimmick he works up with where he gives them easier penance for money. So not a good character at all. Plus, he's getting blackmail on all these people. So he's got extra benefit of this. Oh, and he says he's got a special license from the Pope. Friars didn't hear confession. That wasn't their job. Said sweetly he heard his penitence at shrift with pleasant absolution for a gift. He was an easy man in penance giving, where he could hope to make a decent living. It's a sure sign whenever gifts are given to a poor order that a man's well shriven. And should he give enough, he knew in verity the penitent repented in sincerity. In other words, the more you gave him, the easier the penance was going to be. And remember, this is a time period where they really took that serious. Today, not so much, but back then, very much so a serious thing. It says, for many a fellow is so hard of heart he cannot weep for all his inward smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, one should give silver for a poor friar's care. Look at his justification. He's like, so many of us are so stubborn and don't care that we need to hit us where it really hurts, and that's in our pocketbooks. He kept his tippet stuffed with pins for curls and pocket knives to give to pretty girls. That one's what makes me think about that earlier statement about the lustful nature of this character. The fact that he's got little gifts to give to girls as he's traveling around. He seems to me to be up to something that's untoward. But certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well and played the hurdy-gurdy. At sing-songs he was champion of the hour. His neck was whiter than a lily flower, but strong enough to butt a bruiser down. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid too, better than lepers, beggars, and that crew. For in so eminent a man as he, it was not fitting with his dignity of his position, dealing with the scum of wretched lepers. Nothing good can come of dealing with the slum and gutter dwellers, but only with the rich and victual sellers. So he's traveling to all these towns that are in his district, and he's not spending any time with the people he should be with, the people who need him, the sick, the infirmed. He's instead hanging out in taverns with the tavern maids and barkeepers and drunks, and you get the suggestion that that's what he is. He's a drunk. The idea, again, like the monk, though, it's like, why should he hang out with all these poor people who need help? There's nothing good that can come from that. There's not supposed to be. That's his job to help those people. He should be a servant. He shouldn't be expecting things from them. Yet that's what he's doing. Okay, it says, but anywhere a profit might accrue, courteous he was and lowly of service too. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He was the finest beggar of his batch, and for his begging district paid a rent. His brethren did no poaching where he went. For though a window mightn't have a shoe, so pleasant was his holy how-do-you-do, he got his farthing from her just the same before he left, and so his income came to more than he laid out. Okay, gimmick here. This guy is such a good beggar. He's managing to get money out of people who don't even have it to give to him. And it says his income became to more than he laid out. So he's paid the rent. He's paying out of his pocket for this begging district. He's not doing that out of the kindness of his soul. He's doing it so he can skim off of the top. He's stealing from the church. The other two, the nun and the monk, it was suggested. This one's flat out stated. He's stealing. All right? All right. Just like a puppy, he was ever... I'm sorry, let me back up. We stopped midline. It says, and how he romped, just like a puppy, he was ever prompt to arbitrate disputes on settling days, for a small fee, in many helpful ways. Not then appearing as your cloistered scholar with threadbare habit, hardly worth $1, but much more like a doctor or a pope. Of double worsted was his semi-coat upon his shoulders, and the swelling fold about him, like a bell about its mold when it is casting, rounded out his dress. He lisped a little out of wantonness to make his English sweet upon the tongue. When he had played his harp or having sung, his eyes would twinkle in his head as bright as any star upon a frosty night. This worthy's name was Hubert, it appeared. So at the end here, we get this idea that he also is serving as an arbitrator that you can buy. He's crooked as can be. He can be bought for, whichever side gives him more money, he, finds in their favor, okay? Bad dude, bad guy, man. I would attach lust to him by far, but you could probably attach greed as well because he's a thief. He's a really bad character, okay? Now, that's our triumvirate there right now of the religious figures. There's more to come, but you can see they increased in how bad they were. The nun's okay. She just, unfortunate. The monk's got some definite problems and I think is a bad dude. The friar is a horrible human being. So let's get away. We've done a couple of first estaters. We did have a third estate because the yeoman would fall into that. But now we're going to get two more of those, okay? And this is going to be the merchant and the cleric. And there's not a lot about them. I realize the video's gone long, but it's because the friar's a huge character, okay? So let's talk about the merchant first. There was a merchant with forking beard and motley dress. High on his horse he sat, upon his head a Flemish beaver hat, and on his feet daintily buckled boots. He told of his opinions and pursuits in solemn tones, and how he never lost. The sea should be kept free at any cost, he thought, upon the Harwich Holland range. He was an expert at currency exchange. This estimable merchant so had set his wits to work, none knew he was in debt. He was so stately in negotiation, loan, bargain, and commercial obligation. He was an excellent fellow all the same. To tell the truth, I do not know his name. Okay, so a couple of things about this guy. He's a merchant. He's good at what he does. He's very opinionated and doesn't mind sharing his opinions, particularly about tariffs, taxes, piracy, anything that deals with the ocean and that could impact his bottom line. The ironic thing about him is he's in a massive amount of debt. He talks the talk, but he's overextended himself, and he's in massive amounts of debt. Kind of sarcastic there at the end. He was an excellent fellow all the same, but to tell the truth, I do not know his name. Yes, part of that is so that the couplet will work, but the other part is that, to point out he's an excellent fellow, but not worth remembering, to be honest with you, okay? So what do we attach the merchant to? Well, the merchant is like businessmen of today, okay? And by the way, I didn't give you like modern day parallels with the nun, the monk, and the friar. Those are all religious figures. I mean, you see this sort of poor behavior in some religious people, but they're not. That's not as. We'll talk about it in class. Okay, I'm running out of time. Those of you who are watching this from home, I'll try to send you some messages about what we could maybe parallel these people with. But this merchant is today's businessman. I mean, no matter how much you make, you still live check to check. So most people, whether you're making minimum wage or whether you're making six figures, it's like you're still going to overextend yourself and end up in debt up to your eyeballs because it seems like that's the American way. So the merchant is a very stereotypical figure that we could still attach to today. Merchants back then overdid it. They do today too. He's also lying about it though. He thinks he knows everything about like taxes and stuff, but he's looking at it from his perspective because obviously taxes and tariffs have a benefit, but not for him. So he's acting like, anyone who disagrees is a horrible person and, trying to come off as a very successful businessman when it's obvious he's got issues, okay? All right, our last character is your consummate college student, okay? He's called the Oxford Cleric here, but if we're going to talk about how it parallels to modern characters, he's me, okay? I'm not in college now because I have to make money, but guys, heaven for me would be to continuously be in class. Keep learning stuff, teaching things, and then also going, I could spend half the day teaching classes, the other half learning other stuff. I would be in heaven. This guy, learning is what he cares about, so I get this guy's pain, all right? So let's read about him. An Oxford cleric, still a student though, one who had taken logic long ago, was there. His horse was thinner than a rake, and he was not too fat, I undertake. Okay, that's not me. I definitely don't have that part. But had a hollow look, a sober stare. The thread upon his overcoat was bare. Now let's talk about this guy real quick. It's like his horse is not taken well care of. Okay, that'd be like me in my car. My car is just, run down. I don't care. It gets me from place to place. That's fine. Now, he's scrawny because he's not eating. Now, I'm fat because I eat bad food. But bad food in 2020 is cheaper than good food. So, I have a little bit of similarity with him there. He said he had found no preferment in the church, and he was too unworldly to make search for secular employment. So it's like he doesn't really want to work in the church because he's not really. I don't know that it's because he's not religious, or it's just because he hasn't found someone to support him to get him in. Because back then it was harder to get a job in the church, and it says he's not worldly enough for secular employment. So he can't really find his place. It says, by his bed he preferred having 20 books in red and black of Aristotle's philosophy to having fine clothes, fiddle, or psaltery. So in other words, it says he cares about books. Again, if you were to go to my house right now and look, first of all, you can see behind me. These are my books. These aren't school books. And then, of course, if you go to my house, my nightstand has got books stacked up to it. Not as much as my wife. On her side, she's got them to the ceiling almost. But books are something that we care about in my house. And I'd probably prefer records to books, but books would be in second place, right behind it. As though a philosopher, as I have told, he had not found the stone for making gold. So Harry Potter people get that. You know about the Philosopher's Stone. What the Philosopher's Stone legendarily could do was transmute other things into gold. So the joke here is he's a philosopher, but he's not doing anything practical with it, because that's the problem with philosophy. Say you're going to get a degree in philosophy, and people are going to be like, what are you going to do with that? And, you can teach philosophy, I guess. So that's kind of the joke there. He hasn't found anything productive to do with his degree. And by the way, that hurts because I feel like a liberal arts and English or a philosophy degree are wonderful things to have. But, education is not all practical, guys. Some of us were put on this planet to be thinkers, all right? The world needs more of those, trust me. All right, he says, whatever money from his friends he took, he spent on learning or another book, and prayed for them most earnestly, returning thanks to them that thus paying for his learning. So he sends all the people who help him out and give him loans, thoughts, and prayers. But as far as paying them back, not so much. His only care was study, and indeed he never spoke a word more than was need. Formal at that, respectful in the extreme, short to the point, and lofty in theme. The thought of moral virtue filled his speech, and he would gladly learn and gladly teach. So the guy doesn't talk a lot, but when he does, he's very lofty in what he says. He loves to talk about morals. A very smart guy. Is this guy a bad person? No. Is he flawed? For sure. Part of it's because, again, this is one you could almost attach gluttony to. I know that's a funny thing to say, but he overindulges in his learning and things like that. That's when you become obsessed with one thing. Gluttony is definitely something you can attach to that person. So he's gluttonous in some way because that's all he cares about is learning, and everything else, what he eats, what his horse looks like, his clothing, everything else is passed up for that one thing. So that's gluttony, to be honest with you. It seems shocking because he's scrawny and we think of gluttony as fat people things, but that's not the case. Okay. All right, so 30-minute video, and I apologize for that, but we are tackling a lot, all right? And I still didn't really give you your parallels for your three religious figures, so, but I'm going to end us there so that we can get this out of the way and get this posted and put on the OneNote page. It probably will be done tomorrow morning, not today, because I'm going to try to finish my other video and get out of here. But I hope this was helpful for those of you who are not here with us, or those of you who are reviewing, because obviously this is a lot to tackle on your own. It's brilliant, by the way. It's an amazing thing. It does so many cool things, and it's very artistic, and I love it, but I understand that on your own this is quite intimidating. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for watching this. I think as of right now, the first video on the Canterbury Tales has 0 views. So, I may be talking to no one at this point, but I'm enjoying making it. I love talking about this, even if it's to the faceless internet and no one's listening. So have a wonderful evening, and I will see you for the next section where we're going to tackle a few more third estate guys that are kind of boring. Honestly, this next section is going to be just some interesting, but not my favorite characters. But then we get back into some of the really interesting people, like the wife of Bath. So we'll get that on Let's see. Let me do my math here. That'll be next week, so she'll be on Tuesday. So that one, we're going to get back to some really interesting stuff. So hang in there, though. Tomorrow still got some interesting characters. All right, guys. Have a good one.